My name is Marlena Gonzalez, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist at NPR. Welcome to In Focus, How Housing Can Shrink the Racial Wealth Gap. As we talk about solutions to the wealth gap, I want to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. Minnesota is the homeland of the Dakota people, who have lived here for thousands of years. Indigenous people from other Indigenous nations also reside in Minnesota and have made innumerable contributions to our region. Indigenous people are still here, they're thriving and contributing to our collective futures. The In Focus series is a part of NPR's commitment to host conversations that bring awareness, dialogue, and community solutions to Minnesota's persistent racial disparities. We want to help us see our shared humanity and gain a better understanding of what our fellow community members face. We want to thank Thomson Reuters for providing continuing support for In Focus. And ahead of today's discussion, NPR hosted a story circle with community members from across Minnesota. They shared personal stories about how housing and wealth are intertwined. And this hour, we want to hear from you too. So if you have a question or a personal story to share, use the Q&A button to submit it, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows. And if you register for the event through Zoom, you'll receive a survey from NPR. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Angela Davis, who hosts the 9 a.m. talk show on NPR News and will guide today's conversation.
Thank you, Marlena. Yes, I am Angela Davis here at NPR News, and so thrilled to have our guests with me here in person at our headquarters in St. Paul for our latest In Focus conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about the wealth gap here in Minnesota and learning a lot more about how we are in the space that we're in right now. I'll introduce the guests in just a moment, but first, I want to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about for the next hour. As many of you know, income inequality has deepened dramatically here in the U.S. Economic gains in recent decades have been unevenly distributed, with the vast majority of the wealth going to those who are already on top. Part of the discrepancy is rooted in the inability to obtain stable housing or buy property. Owning your own home is one of the easiest ways to build wealth in America, and that is due in part to the federal tax policy. But for many people of color, the door to home ownership has long been closed. In fact, Minnesota has one of the largest racial home ownership gaps in the country. Today, we're going to talk about why that is and what is being done to narrow the gap. And with that, let me introduce our panelists. We have with us today Kim Smith-Moore. Kim is the Senior Director of Home Ownership Programs at the Minnesota Home Ownership Center. And prior to this, she worked at Wells Fargo, leading their home ownership strategy and managing the Neighborhood Lift program. And that program helps remove some of the barriers to home ownership by preparing people for the home buying process and providing down payment assistance for people to purchase homes. Kim is also a licensed real estate agent with more than 20 years of experience, so I know you have a lot of stories. Welcome to In Focus, Kim. So glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me.
We also have with us Leanne Little-Wolf, and Leanne is the co-executive director of the American Indian Community Housing Organization based in Duluth. She has almost 30 years of experience and has worked on local, regional, tribal, and state issues in housing, community safety, and racial equity. And as an Anishinaabe woman, she's committed to community-focused leadership and figuring out how we can all belong to each other. Thank you for being on our panel today, Leanne, and thank you for driving down from Duluth.
Yeah, miigwech. It's great to be here.
And we have Carla Benson-Rudden here. Carla is the executive director of the Jeremiah Program's St. Paul campus, a position that she assumed just a little more than a year ago. And if you're not familiar with the Jeremiah Program, it works to disrupt the cycle of poverty 2 generations at a time by helping single mothers and their children get stable housing and a solid education. And prior to coming to the Jeremiah Program, Carla worked in higher education at Macalester College in St. Paul. So glad you're here. Carla, welcome to In Focus.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I just want to remind all of you watching on Zoom right now that we do want you to be involved in the conversation. So please submit your questions as we talk using that Q&A button, and I will do my best to work those questions in. So let's dive in by starting with what I would consider a bleak reality. Just last month, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve issued a report that found that people of color in the Twin Cities are far more likely than whites to be denied a mortgage, regardless of credit scores, the location of the homes, and other key factors. And Kim, I'll start with you. Did that research surprise you at all?
You know, it actually did not surprise me. It actually just really, to me, brought light to the situation that's always existed. I've worked in the mortgage industry. I've had the background. What was surprising, I guess, kind of surprising, is you have pairing a black person with a white person, the same characteristics. This time was interesting because they've done that before. They looked at credit score, and they had never looked at credit score before. They looked at this other similar characteristics, but everything was the same. So that really tells you that things that have happened and that continue to happen are intentional. And so we have to stop that cycle.
I mentioned in the introduction that the Minnesota Homeownership Center is where you work now, but you came from Wells Fargo, so you've also worked as a realtor for decades. I'm sure you have some sense of history, and I'm wondering if you can sort of take us back in time a little bit and tell us what you think has led us here. What is going on that has gotten us to the point that we are today?
You know, that's a great question, and I think everybody's trying to figure out that question. I really think it's around biases. I think it's people have biases. They call them unintentional, unconscious biases. And people don't understand that everyone has biases, right? And it's not a bad thing, but it's how you manage your biases, how you're aware of your biases. Your biases came from, they come from how you were, something that happened in your life, right? How you associate with different things. And I truly believe that happens in every sector of the home buying business, right? From your real estate agent that's showing the properties, from your loan officer, from the person who's underwriting. Everybody has biases, and it's how you choose to operate your biases. So an example, if you've only had bad experiences dealing with people of color, right? Brown and black people, that's not, so it's a negative, right? It's not a positive thought that you have. And so you tend to make decisions based on your biases. And people need to realize and understand that we need to stop doing that as a nation. I think we continuously do it, and we do it, and we don't answer for that.
And as a real estate agent, also, I'm sure you're aware, and probably many people in the audience too, a lot of stories recently about racial covenants and the history of deeds and just in writing, like, like people of color can't purchase these homes.
I mean, that's something that, you know, now everybody's talking about it, but it's something that's always been there. There's always been those covenants. You know, if you look at Minneapolis, I mean, the north area of the country, those covenants, even northeast, they've always been there, right? We had the covenants, but down south had the colored bathrooms and that. But we didn't have that, but we had the covenants, which people could not live in a certain area if you were of color.
Well, right, and and it's written explicitly in the deed.
Oh,
right?
definitely.
That homes would only be sold to white families in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and that work is being unearthed now. And that really is what then leads to lack of opportunity for generations, for families of color, black families, Latinx families, indigenous families, to not get in on that home buying, right? Most of our wealth, that generational wealth comes from a home. And so if you are discriminated against for generations, it's hard to then start now, right, to do that. And what we see are the impacts of your question was, how did we get here? Why are we still here seeing these disparities? A lot of it is around those systemic injustices that happened around racial covenants, redlining, all of those sorts of things that still, though not legally binding anymore, still show up in actions, right? And in thoughts and all of those sorts of things and those biases that Kim was talking about.
And there's programs out there today in Minneapolis that are uncovering those deeds and taking them off.
Yes.
But they still exist, and they'll continue to exist, although, as you stated, they're not enforced. But that really prohibits.
And Leanne, in your experience, do you hear from people of color who say that they've been denied, a mortgage? I mean, we know the numbers are there. We know that it's true. But is that something that you hear in conversation too, that folks are just having problems being even considered?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll just tell a little story about my own family. I'll go back to like the 1950s when my grandparents lived on Leech Lake Reservation and their home burned down, and they needed to, they left to the Iron Range to find employment. And when they got to the Iron Range, they couldn't find anyone that would rent to them because they were Native. And so that first, they left in the fall, and they found a resort that would allow them to pitch a tent, a canvas tent in the back, wouldn't let them rent one of the resort cabins. And so, my grandparents lived out in a canvas tent over the winter, and my grandma had 5 children under the age of 5, so 5 babies, and went through the winter. And then my grandfather got a job in Hibbing and then moved, and again, they had a hard time finding anyone that would rent to them. And so my grandma finally persuaded someone to rent, and they started with an apartment. And my grandfather had skills, so he was working in the mines, and he had income. So eventually, after a few rentals, my grandparents bought a home. And like as a kid, when I heard that my grandparents owned their own home, because my family, I grew up moving around rental to rental, that was like a huge mark of success. And then in my career, I have worked with, I've been a homeless case manager with young people, and I see young people that work really hard. Some of them are single parents. They're holding a job, 2 jobs, and they're doing really good, but home ownership is not in their minds, and they don't feel like they have access to it, and they don't even dream about it.
And they don't see it, probably.
No, we don't see it. I mean, very few people, and the people who do own homes, it's like a miracle to us.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to note some important numbers from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, because I think they truly paint a picture of what we're talking about. Their website shows that after the federal government began encouraging home ownership, that white home ownership, the rate here in Minnesota, increased steadily from 55% back in 1940 to 77% in 2019. Now, home ownership for Minnesota households of color and Native Americans, it decreased from 46% in 1940 to 44% in 2019. And then when you look at black home ownership, the rate peaked here in Minnesota in 1950 and has fallen almost every decade since then. It's fallen back. And now, today, nearly 70 years later, that gap between white Minnesotans and black Minnesotans, when you look at home ownership, it's a 50 percentage point gap, with white Minnesotans being roughly around 75% when you look at home ownerships, and blacks being around 25%. So why do you think we're seeing this gap widening, increasing, Carla?
Well, I think it's a lot of what we talked about before, right, in terms of access and opportunities. I think it's so multifold. It's both the structural inequities that have been with us that keep us from being able to afford a mortgage, being seen homes, having the economic mobility to choose, right?
I think too with that, and I totally agree with that, it's there's a lot of myths out there around home ownership, right? Myths that you can't, that you have to have 20% down, right? That you have to have good credit, right? And so these myths are being taught or told to the communities, and they're not true. And so a lot of people think, oh, I can't put 20% down. Oh, my credit is bad. I'll never own a home. I've had experience with homeowners for many years, and have went around the country promoting down payment assistance, because that's one of the barriers, right? Down payment assistance. I remember speaking with a customer one day, and she came in, and I says, well, how did you hear about the program? And she says, oh, I heard it on the news, so that's great. Come on. She says, I think I'm going to leave. And I says, well, you made it here. Why are you going to leave? And she says, well, I think I'm going to leave because I don't think it'll ever happen. I'll ever own a home. And I says, well, why leave? You made it here. And she said, you know what? She says, people have told me time after time that I will never own a home, that my credit is too bad. And she was a woman of color. And I told her, I said, don't leave. Don't leave. Just stay and speak with someone. So she spoke with somebody. She got done speaking, and she came over to me, and she said, I just want to thank you because the person that I spoke with listened to me. versus how she had been treated previously. So that's just one incident. Have had many stories like this where people aren't giving people a chance. People come in with hope, and the first thing that if a person says to them, you can't do it, or gives them negativity, then they end up kind of taking that back, and they never feel like homeownership's achievable.
Leanne, if we transition to see what's happening with indigenous communities, particularly in Minnesota right now, there's about a 78% home ownership rate for whites now in 2022, but the home ownership rate for American Indians is at around 49%. What are you seeing in terms of Native people who own homes?
Well, I just want to respond to what Kim said. I think that a lot of times, like when people are coming in, people are looking, it feels like they're looking to deny instead of to help. And so I think that that's a core issue. So I think you need to have, so we have like Native CDFIs, the institutions that can help build credit. They can help access loans for small business startup and for home ownership. And I think that, I went to a financial education program through one of them, just a short example. And they did a culturally responsive training around money. It was I've been to like 3 different financial education courses held by community organizations. And the one that this Native CDFI held was the most real. I mean, it spoke to me about how I actually view money, why I view money the way I do, and then started to talk in real terms about what I needed to do or what did I want to do. It wasn't what I needed to do. It was like, what do you want to do? Right. So I think with Native home ownership, we need to have more programs like that have more capacity. They need to have more capital to lend out. And I think we need to start looking for creative ways to engage our community to want, that when they say, what do I want to do? I want to own a home. Right. That's what we need to get to. Just my background has been in working with people who have been unhoused and unsheltered. And so it's this, we want people to have permanent homes. But a lot of times we're not thinking about owning a home, right? We're talking about a permanent supportive program, which is needed. Those are needed. But I also think that we have to dream bigger, and we have to start thinking about that. And there's some programs in Minnesota that have been doing that.
And I think Leanne, one of the things that you said is quick to deny. And I'll just state that the system has been set up that way. The system, the FHA underwriting guidelines, when those were first created, were created where they redlined. Okay. And some of those same guidelines are still followed today. Things have changed, but that's what the underwriters are reviewing. So if they're reviewing someone with a lower credit score, it's kind of like, okay, let me find something, right? Let me find something, a reason to make the decision to deny. And it's not looking at the positive thing. But I agree, you need to know your power. And there's a lot of programs out there that are really starting to work with customers, even work with families. I can say Build Wealth Minnesota is doing some great things working with families to get them educated and understand what a credit score means. Because we can talk about credit score, but lots of people don't really understand the credit score and really what that means.
You want to say more?
Yes, absolutely. I was going to share some of what Kim was saying, but also what we're all talking about is like shifting this narrative. Who is a homeowner, right? What do you need to be a homeowner? I know at Jeremiah program, we work with single moms who are pursuing their college degree, 2-year, 4-year program. We work in a 2-generation model, right? Where we work and invest in the mom's vision for herself, as well as her vision for her children, right? In terms of their educational goals. And moms don't have to choose between the two. That's kind of shifting this narrative that you have to choose one or the other. And so as mom goes to college, child sees her, we're able to partner with mom and provide early childhood education support, housing support, coaching support, to help her enhance her networking, her her ability to see herself and know that she has the power to be a college graduate, to then earn an income that will help with her economic mobility so that she can then become a homeowner. And so we know that single moms are great moms. We know that people of color are great neighbors, homeowners, and can do all of these things, right? We have to shift that narrative, just like we have to shift the narrative of lenders, of bankers who are who may be based in this old narrative of redlining, where these are, not necessarily any data that says these populations wouldn't be good neighbors or will bring property values down, but using the historical narrative that happens, and that's why folks can't get mortgages still, right? And so how do we shift that narrative and shift it to the positive and then take action to change it now that we know it? I think the Mapping Prejudice project that the University of Minnesota is doing is a great resource as well to learn more about the racial covenants, what that looks like, and then think about ways so that we don't repeat those things in the future.
I love shifting the narrative. I think that's great. I can tell you that the Minnesota Homeownership Center is working with the Groundbreak Coalition, and it's started up by the McKnight Foundation, and it's really bringing all the practitioners together, everybody together, just really talking about solutions. And I really, I think there's been many groups that get together. When something happens, they come together and they talk about something and they try to solve something. But I think this is really different because the players at the table, and I was just at a last conversation that they had, they're kind of like, we want to do something, but it has to be meaningful, and we have to be there. We can't just come up with a solution that's only going to last for a couple years, right? It has to be, we have to be involved. In addition, we have to involve the community, and I think that is key on any solution, involving the community, having them be a part of the solution and own it.
I want to bring in some questions from our audience, and a lot of them have to do with credit scores. People with bad credit. A lot of people have bad credit. How do you get out of that hole? One of the questions asks, what are the tools to deal with racism built into the credit scores, given that no one regulates the private credit rating agencies? Do we set up a public credit rating agency, develop a fund that loans money in some sort of other way? So if people are stuck in a situation, they have bad credit, what is available to help them to get out of that hole and still have home ownership as a tangible goal? We talk about a lot of programs, but what are you seeing that is encouraging, that helps people with their credit scores? Leanne, any stories that you can share of how people have found a way to get over that hurdle?
Yeah. Well, we have a federal loan program that's specific for if you're enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, that you can access this loan, and they don't look at your credit score. So they look, but there's other things that can, so debt to income ratio is considered. And there's I think you have to have 12 months employment previous. So it lessens that barrier. And so I think, that's an example of we can have different loan products that could be designed to help people. And I think we really got to focus on how do we want to address this in equity? And then we have to come up with those solutions. So I really like that, looking at the community and seeing what the community's lived experiences and what are those direct barriers, and really listening to what the community is experiencing and what they're saying. I think that's where we find these paths forward. The other thing is when you're talking about women being the head of the household, data. So Women's Foundation does a status on girls and women, and they'll do a racial and a gender lens, and they talk about, by race, who is the primary breadwinner in the family. And so you could see, this isn't the most current, but the one that I had looked at three or 4 years ago, it was 48% for white women, and then it went up by race, so Latina, Black, Indigenous. And I was primarily looking at Native American women, so it was 80%. And at the same time, I was thinking about this issue of violence and how much violence Native women experience. And I started making those connections between, so if the 80% of Native women are the primary breadwinner, anytime something violent happens to them, that ripples out to the whole family. So I think that we have to look at those issues. They're complex, but those are where the answers are. I could go back to my grandparents. My grandfather died when he was 42 years old, and he had 14 children, which my grandmother then became the primary breadwinner. And so you got to look at the health disparities and how those also play into the picture. And then it's a full picture. It's not just one siloed issue.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many things that can go into, you have to ask the question, how did one get into debt in the first place, right? And so when we think about, Again, to me, it often goes back to economic mobility. Are folks in a position where, and when you talk about social justice and inequities, we wouldn't have generational poverty, we wouldn't have so much credit card debt, we wouldn't have all of these inequities in income, right? It's not just based in economics, it's in the inequities. And so if we didn't have inequities in healthcare, in childcare, in employment, in housing, all of these things, right? We wouldn't have these concerns. So we have to talk about what the root of the problem is and what are the barriers that keep folks from getting a job, that will get them the income, that will help them get out of debt, that they can have an actual, not just a living wage, but a thriving wage, right? Because if you're only able to have a position that is at minimum wage, which is going up, which is great. But when I was looking at a statistic recently that said really the living wage, an ideal living wage in the Twin Cities is if you make $50 an hour.
And then everything else is going up too.
Right, everything's going up, but that's not our minimum wage, right?
$50 an hour.
That is what I had seen, right? And so it's sort of like, and so Jeremiah program, the reason that we know that higher education isn't the only way to address inequities, but we know that it's the greatest lever for economic mobility, right? Like we know, U.S. Labor and Statistics have said, Bureau of Labor and Statistics has said that those with a bachelor's degree, median income is 84% more than someone with a high school diploma. So that
But
goes
those
a long way.
degrees, those college degrees take time, and they take
time, exactly.
So I want to bring in a question from the audience for you, Carla. Someone asked, what about women who were single moms and obtained an education, and in doing so, were not able to focus on home ownership?
Absolutely. And so the question is, what happens to those moms? At Jeremiah program, good question. What we do is make sure that when we partner with moms and when we coach moms throughout the program, that we're making sure that while they're in the program, while they're getting that college degree, that we're moving barriers that allow them to access internships, opportunities to get into organizations, companies that will provide them the opportunity to network and to ideally move into a position that will then put them into a salary range so that they can then focus on getting out of debt if that's what they need, partnering with other housing organizations that might be able to work with them on affordable rents so that they can build a savings and begin building that generational wealth so that then they can work with a financial planner and have access to a financial planner, have some social capital in the networks that they have built so that they then can look at a process. And I love what you do, Kim, so that they can have the resources and tools and access to what they need so that then they can see themselves as homeowners and begin the steps to that journey, if that's what they want to do.
I think that's important. And then kind of back to the main question that they were asking about credit scores, because there's a lot of people that are struggling trying to get their credit scores a certain way. And I think that it's very important that you reach out to a subject matter expert, somebody who knows what they're doing, right? And that's where the Minnesota Homeownership Center can help. We have people that help with financial advice that can pull your credit report and can pull it as a soft pull, right? That's not going to affect your numbers, right? We can then take a look at it. We have advisors across the state of Minnesota. They're nonprofit organizations that can take a look at your credit score and then give you the tools and tell you what you need to do, right? They can work with the credit bureaus. If there's something on there that shouldn't be there, they can help you in getting it off. In addition, there's people out there today that don't even have any credit, right? That they choose not to even go down that path.
Right.
I have a younger brother who doesn't have a credit score, right? And why? Because he works hard every day. He works, he never really applied for credit because he pays for his cars, right? He pays cash.
He saves and then purchases.
He saves and then
no
purchases.
credit score.
He never got caught up in that, right? And so there's people that, what do they do, right?
Because then they haven't demonstrated that you can take a risk on me.
But
when I pay my bills.
there's alternative models out there where they can check with your landlord, right? You keep your pay stubs. They can take a look at that. They can pull your cell phone bills, right? There's things that can be done to really establish that credit. And I think a lot of organizations, a lot of lenders are starting to look at what are some alternative models that we really need for people who have not good credit scores or have no credit, who have opted out.
life.
And isn't that interesting? Again, it's sort of like that's part of changing the structure. Like, why would you not want someone who pays in cash, has savings, but they didn't establish a credit? Like that person can't get a mortgage because they, or what have you, because they don't have a credit record.
Well, you
but they have that history of always paying for things. Isn't that?
Definitely. Well, you have
strange?
people that have established credit and filed bankruptcy multiple
Right.
times
Who
and
can
then
just-
establish credit again and are able to purchase a home and
Yeah.
continuously do
And
that.
Kim, I want to make sure
Yeah.
the services that the Minnesota Home Ownership Center offers, free. Are these services free?
Yes, they are free.
All right. Do you feel enough people know that the center exists and that you offer these services? And it sounds like locations all over the state.
You know, hey, you can call. I can give you the phone number, 651-659-9336. Also, hocmn.org. But again, it's a network of nonprofit organizations. That's what their focus is, on counseling. So they provide advice, financial advice if you're just struggling with something, right? Financially, your credit. If you're looking to purchase a home, I think it's really great. Anybody who's looking to purchase a home, there's home buyer education courses. These courses normally do cost $40, but $35 to $40, but there are scholarships available. So ask about those scholarships available. And also foreclosure prevention. We haven't talked about foreclosure prevention. If I could do a quick
Foreclosure,
plug,
right?
because that's very important. Some people don't even want to foreclose. My house isn't being foreclosed. I'm not getting notices in the mail because out of sight, out of mind. Oops, sorry about that.
They don't know?
Well, they don't. You know, but you don't really want to deal with it, right?
Okay.
And so I think it's very important that if you're a couple months, if you're struggling paying your bill, call somebody. Because here's the thing, I've worked for a major lender. They don't want your property. They'd rather work something out with you. And a lot of time people are fearful in calling their servicer to work out some sort of agreement, some sort of a modification. So here we are trying to address the homeownership gap. But if we don't address people who are already in homes, black and brown homeowners that currently own a home and keeping them in their home, the gap is going to get bigger and bigger.
Well, there are trust issues. This is a sort of something one of our questions from the audience is sort of getting at, who says, by the way, great panelists. Several panelists have talked about culturally specific financial products and services. What are other culturally specific approaches that are working well and could be expanded? Leanne, do you find that there is distrust, that people have had bad experiences with banks or with property owners, and so that becomes a barrier to home ownership because they just don't see this is not for us?
Yeah, I had a conversation with Leech Lake Financial, which is a native CDFI, and just Rob Aiken, and he talked about how when they did a needs assessment, they were getting ready to use their CDFI funds for small business startups. He's like, well, nobody's really ready to do that, and the biggest issue is access to credit. So what they came up with, they designed a program where for collateral, they were able to use paid time off. So if they had collected paid time off from their work, so they knew that they were employed, they could use that, and then they could get a small personal loan. And I asked, well, what is the loan for? Is it to save up for a home, or is it for, is it designated? No, it's for whatever that person wants to use that money for. We don't care. What we want to see is that they have access to build credit and to show that make them payments, and then that will open the door for other things. So that's where we have to start, because that's where our community's at. And I think that's the kind of solutions that we have to look for, and we have to start implementing. And we need resources.
Yeah.
So I think like the state and the federal funding streams need to be, they have to be responsive as well.
Those are the creative ways that we've been talking about, right? That can get to change.
What's
right?
working?
Yeah, right. And so I think what I heard from some of what you were saying also, Leanne, is that, again, I think we said this before, those who are at the center of the issue are the experts of that issue, right? And so with single moms at Jeremiah program, we center them. They're the experts of what it's like to be a single mom, going to college, raising children, trying to find childcare, all of that. So they inform how we do our work. And in fact, they are at the decision-making table, and we are doing the empowerment and leadership for them so that with them so that they can become those leaders, right? So I love what you were saying. I think an example is First Independence Bank, which is a black-owned bank that just opened in Minneapolis to serve the Twin Cities community. It's Black owned, but it's for everyone. I think that's what they say. But it is an example of, and we are hopefully we'll have an opportunity to partner with them and share with Jeremiah Program families this opportunity, because they work with folks who have trust issues with banks, who haven't been able to open a bank account because they may be overdrafted a couple times or what have you, but they'll still work with you, and you can have terms that are realistic and reasonable and help build your credit, right? So I think ways in which we can build wealth in communities of color, in communities that have been traditionally lower, historically lower income for what have you. That's how we rebuild the trust, when it's community centric, when it is built with people in the community who are doing the work. That's how we get this, how we expand opportunities, that's how we expand access. That's how we can begin to build generational wealth as well.
I love that, Carla.
And that's a question from an audience member as well. Do you think the opening of the first Black-owned bank in Minnesota has potential to make a difference in less biased lending? Kim, you spent years working for Wells Fargo. What is this a game changer, having a new bank?
Oh, definitely. And actually, I'm meeting with them next week. So, but they are just very inclusive, and I think that's very good. They want people to be a part of the solution. You're speaking of trust. I came from a big bank, right? And so not lots of people trust big banks. And so I think trust is a big issue. I think it's important that, especially within the Black community, Black and brown communities, people look like them. People look like me, right? People that I'm dealing with. I have a more trusting if I'm dealing with someone. And I'll give you an example, and I had mentioned this organization. It's a nonprofit organization in the center, in the heart of North Minneapolis, Build Wealth. They have a family stabilization program, and what they do is they bring the whole family to the table. They bring the whole family to talk about savings and credit, right? And I just love the philosophy, because it's important that the whole family is involved, right?
The kids, the grandma.
The kids, everybody that's a part of that family is involved. Say the son wants to buy those Jordan tennis shoes, right, and they're trying to buy a house. He ain't getting those Jordan tennis shoes, right, because the family is focused on purchasing that home.
Yeah. I want to ask each of you this question. Are you worried about a fresh wave of housing instability, especially now as many families are struggling with what inflation has brought us, higher gas prices, higher grocery prices? Folks are struggling, and to many, home ownership just now seems even more intangible as a goal. Do you have some thoughts? Have you been thinking about, could things slide back even more, Leanne?
Yeah. I mean, I see it every day. I mean, I see it because we have, in my city, which is a smaller city, urban area,
Duluth area.
Duluth, we have more people who are unsheltered, who are staying outside on the street and staying in tents than ever before. And so, we have a warming shelter in the winter, and that's a place where people go so they don't freeze to death. And so the numbers this last year, we had over 500 people using that unduplicated, and half of the people were from communities of color, and about 30, I think it was like 37% were indigenous. So I mean, not only home ownership, but even accessing like safe, affordable housing is an issue, and then shelter. So they're not accessing shelter; they're staying outside, and it's becoming embedded. So I am concerned with that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Any thoughts, Carla, about the gap widening because we are living in such tough financial times?
I mean, for sure. I mean, when you think about, who's on the margins of economic mobility, who's on the margins of housing, right? It's of education. It's people of color. It's women. It's single women, right? And when we look at these intersecting identities around race, class, and gender, it's concerning. And so, my question is, are we going to repeat the same patterns of the past, or are we going to, again, look to those who are at the center of the issue to be at the table to make decisions about how we move forward so we don't move backward, right? But for sure, the gas prices going up, what in the world, right? That impacts you differently, and that feels different depending upon your identity and where you're located, right? And so definitely thinking about that at the Jeremiah program. We actually just had an initiative for our hourly staff across our organizations nationally to provide gas cards to our hourly staff, so to provide some relief, right? A short period of relief for that, right? We're trying to think again, what are some short-term solutions that can have some benefit long-term as we think about addressing the problem, larger. But what are the small things we can do now that could, for one family or for a group of people, have positive impact?
Yeah.
And Kim,
and I think
more instability. What do you think?
Yeah. Am I concerned? I think I'm hopeful. I truly am. I'm concerned about, of course, the prices of different things, but I'm hopeful because I think that as we started out today, you talked about building wealth and you talked about housing. Home ownership is really kind of one of the easiest ways, right? And if you have the right tools and resources, if somebody out there who's listening has a job and is struggling, get the help that you need. Go to get resources, right, to help you, because I'll just say now, purchasing a property 2 years from now or even a year from now, the price is going to increase, right? Somebody right now is building equity right now in that property. They're going to gain some equity. So if you're in a position, and I understand rates are starting to go up a little bit, but I remember when rates were 13%. I did an assumable mortgage on a 13% mortgage. And so I remember when they were higher. Hopefully, the market will change, it will correct itself, and you would be able to refinance that home. But if you're in a position to, it's good for long-term, for generational wealth, because properties, market values are going to continuously go up.
So how do we as a society, how do we benefit from more people being homeowners? Why should everyone care about this? That we see more equity in it, and that more people are homeowners rather than in unstable housing or in situations where they're renting and struggling financially.
Well, I think equity is important. I think that's important in terms of building wealth. I think the white population has been successful in achieving that, right? They have property, they build equity, and building equity is using that equity and knowing how to use it. They've used the equity to send their children to colleges, right? To some of the best colleges, and then they work back and get the money back, and the property values go up.
It builds upon other things in life.
Correct. Where the black community wasn't afforded to do that. But now it can happen. We can do it. Some people are sitting on equity and home ownership and don't realize what they're sitting on, right? Because they haven't been able to tap into it and use it for other things, for the generational wealth.
And Leanne, does home ownership open the door to other things, good things in life?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, like, when we're talking about the future, there's our collective future is changing, right? So the type of housing that we need is going to change. We need to have climate prepared housing. And there has to be equity in that as well. And there's opportunity in that. So people can be building that. I think, Leech Lake Tribal College has a sustainable construction program. So I think tribal nations are really investing in solar energy. I think energy efficient homes, everyone should have access to energy efficient homes. So I think it's yes, having a home, but the home that's going to bring you into the future is going to be really important. And then can we help build that future?
Absolutely.
That's good.
And Carla, why is home ownership such a beneficial thing for all of us?
I mean, it's such a beneficial thing, as we were talking about the equity that is built, the generational wealth that is built, what that then does for communities and neighborhoods, for the resources and supports for schools, right, for public schools, investing in your neighborhood, investing in your businesses and small business. Everyone wins.
And it can affect home life.
Exactly. Homeowners, have better life outcomes, right? You have stability because you have a little more financial freedom, a little more financial wellness. That also impacts your health and how you feel. So the benefits are rippling again, right? And so if we can just shift our mindset and our practices systemically to think about how can we all benefit, right? And when the most marginalized of us benefit and are able to access resources, everybody thrives.
Yeah.
That is the case. We see it time and again in businesses. A more ethnically diverse organization is more productive. They're more creative. They do so much better work together, right? That is known to be true. It is the same in communities that are pluralistic and work together, you know, and it can happen, right? But we have to switch our systems. I say that I grew up in a military family on an air base, and so grew up, and this was in like late 70s, early 80s, everybody lived in the same type of house, regardless of rank.
Right.
And the most ethnically diverse neighborhood you can imagine, even in a place, I grew up in a base in North Dakota, even in North Dakota, ethnically diverse. I had teachers of color, I had friends of all, and that's how I grew up, and it was normal, right? That's just kind of how it was. So these things can happen when they're structured in a way, when the system is structured in a way to promote that, right? Instead of structuring it so only one, the history of the United States is where there's only one group has all the privilege, all the power, right? That's the shift in the not only the mindset, but also in the structures that we need to get to in a society. And home ownership and building that wealth does that, because everyone benefits at that point when when it's shared well.
Yeah, restabilizing communities,
Absolutely.
I think, is real important in investing in a community. I managed the down payment assistance program, and one of the requirements was that to receive the down payment assistance, you had to live in the property for 5 years, at least 5 years. After 5 years, you lived in that property, the money was yours. You didn't have to pay it back at all. It was, I would refer to that as instant equity, right? You get 15, 20,000 instant equity as long as you live there for 5 years. But the reason for that 5 years is for people to be invested in their communities, right? And when
Down some roots.
you got it, dig some roots,
Right.
be invested in the community and stabilize it. That's very important.
I want to take more questions from the audience as we talk about the wealth gaps here in Minnesota and the role that stable housing and home ownership plays in that. This question is, how do you feel, or do you feel that credit unions are more willing to work with communities of color? And Carla, the families that you work with at Jeremiah Program, have they had more success with credit unions, or how would you respond to that?
You know, it's interesting when we were talking about trust with banks and things, what we've seen and what I've seen with moms in St. Paul, it's having the education of the difference between a credit union, you know, and a bank, but also the distrust just of banking, right? And so what I've seen, when you were talking about, Kim and Leanne, about the education, about why is it important to have a bank account, how does this work with paying your rent on time or what have you, how can you set up those kinds of structures? I think it's more where families have seen more success are those banks or the credit unions that are willing to work with them and want them to be a part of the community. That's the advantage of a credit union, right? You kind of are buying into the credit union. You're a member of the credit union in different sorts of ways. So I think there are definitely education to be done around those benefits for sure.
Anything you'd add, Leanne?
No, Prosperity Now, which is a national organization, looks at economic disparities, and it's interesting because for Minnesota, I mean, we're the top for prosperity, but not for racial we have the highest racial disparities, which we've known for a number of years, but they have identified where, and it's interesting to me that it's been home ownership, number of people unbanked, and disconnected youth, and they define the disconnected youth as people ages 18 to 24 who are not in school and who are not employed. So we're starting to use the data to kind of draw those connections. And I know this question is about credit unions, but I just think that a lot of people are just unbanked. And people who have access to bank accounts, they don't know what that means. Like, what do you mean you're unbanked? Like,
what is unbanked, and how does one function if one is unbanked?
If you don't have a bank account, you go to Walmart or check cashing,
Payday.
or or Payday, and you use those forms, you know, for your financial activities.
And they charge you high fees.
Yes.
For that.
Charge you high fees.
Very high fees.
And so we just take for granted, you know, what does having a bank account, you know, give you? So the credit unions, I just want to say this, is that Duluth, Community Action Duluth came up with a program to partner with a credit union to give access to car loans. And so they partnered with LSS to help with the down payment. The participant would give part of the down payment, and then they would be able to use the credit union as their to finance this. And then they had cars that were like lower mileage. I think there's some creative ways to partner with different financial institutions.
Anything to add about credit unions?
Well, you know, I talk to a lot of consumers, and I think a lot of consumers are going more towards credit unions versus the large banks. I think it's a trust thing. But they want to be able to go into an office and sit down and have a conversation with someone that knows them and someone that looks like them. So, I mean, I would just say if anybody who's working with Payday or if you're unbanked, you know, maybe you don't want to go to one of the big banks, but try a small credit union. Go in there and you know, take some responsibility, right, on your finances, right? Meet someone, ask questions, gain knowledge, information in terms of, you know, you got to do what's best for you, right? In your situation. I think that's important.
Gaining that knowledge, right?
But it's important that trust is very important. You have to trust who's managing your money.
Absolutely.
I have a comment and a question from a member of the audience who says, we need public policies that increase home ownership in BIPOC communities. For example, give priority to people residing in a community to purchase a home with down payment assistance versus allowing developers to come in and buy up property, which can lead to gentrification. So other headlines that have been in the news lately a lot is about like who owns properties and who is buying properties and then, you know, creating more and more rental units. That's also, you know, making it difficult for people to purchase homes because, you know, there's just fewer homes available.
Yeah.
What are you seeing there?
Well, in the real estate, you know, business, that's happening. I mean, it's been happening. I mean, you know, even at the time of the foreclosure crisis, right, when people's homes are being foreclosed on, market values were dropping. Who was there to purchase those homes? It was investors that were purchasing the homes. And even today, now the investors are still, they're there. They're trying to purchase those properties. As a real estate agent, I just received an email from a major company, an investor company trying to purchase properties, reaching out to real estate agents saying, can you help me to buy these properties up? Right? And so they're on, you know, they're trying, you know, that's a big part. That's a big piece that really there needs to be some focus on. And I would agree with the
Audience member.
There need to see some policies in place to prohibit that from investors. I had proposed something like a first choice, giving, if you're looking to to purchase that property for your family, right, that, you know, they need to be the first choice. They need to be able to look at that offer first before they look at any investor choices. I think that's important.
I like that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Leanne, on policies that would make it easier or make more homes available to purchase?
Oh, yeah.
If
Well,
investors weren't coming in and buying so many houses and turning them into rental properties.
Yeah, I mean, we have affordable housing shortage across the state. I mean, the metro and greater Minnesota, and that's been longstanding, and it's getting worse. And policy comes with funding, and we just had a opportunity this past legislature to increase the amount of resources on housing, and that did not happen. And so we need our elected leaders to really pay attention to this issue across, you know, deeply pay attention to this issue and follow through. I mean, it's really important. We need those policies, but we need that funding.
Because policies is what has gotten us to where the position that we're in today. And I will tell you that there's a special purpose credit. Has anybody ever heard of special purpose credit? You're going to start hearing about it. And a lot of lenders are starting to talk about it now. I heard about it a couple years ago at Wells Fargo, and it provides a way for financial institutions to meet the special credit needs of people who have been impacted by lending discrimination, systematic racism, and redlining, right? And so it's a programs where you can do like a down payment assistance program that's targeted just for people of color, right? BIPOC, Black, Brown communities. And so you're going to start hearing a little bit of that. But
what is it called again?
Special purpose?
Special purpose credit, and it's for lenders to do.
And it goes to people who've had a bad experience or can demonstrate that something happened to them?
Well, you can do a special purpose in a particular area. So say you target in the north side area, right, that had been impacted by special covenants, racial covenants, and things like that, right? So you can do something, anybody who's purchasing in that area could receive down payment assistance, $20,000 or whatever to help them purchase a home, targeted specifically towards African Americans. We have never been able to do anything like this, right? We've been able to do like down payment assistance programs saying, AMI 60%, or below, or 80% or below, taking a look at your income, saying, if you're lower income, if you live in this area, hoping that it would target it on the black and brown communities, low to moderate income communities. But now, and those programs worked for some, but there were Caucasians. I mean, anybody could have been a part of that. Now, this is specific to people of color.
Yeah.
And you can do that. And there were some fair housing. They were kind of, are we able to really do this because of the fair housing laws? Well, they found out that they're able to implement something like this. So now lenders are starting to talk about special purpose credit and how they can best use them.
Yeah, I love that. That's addressing past wrongs, right?
Yes.
It's addressing past injustices.
Yes.
It is a program specifically to address, you've acknowledged the historical racism that was in these policies
That's
and in this lending that kept you out of the opportunity for home ownership. And so here is an opportunity for that to be addressed. And I love that.
What's interesting is it's always been there.
Oh, we just didn't know about it. You see, it's the education piece.
It's always been there, but people didn't feel the need to use it.
See,
I'm curious about what brought each of you into this kind of work, really focusing on wealth gaps and the role that housing can play. And so was there, something compelling about this particular issue, Leanne, that made you want to do the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I started working with youth, and I wanted to work with young people who didn't have opportunity, and because I've seen, like, once given opportunity, what people can do, and so that led me to working with housing and accessing housing, and it just kind of led me down the path. But I just think we need opportunity. I'm a Native woman. I'm Anishinaabe, and I drive across our state, and I think about. I see beautiful homes and beautiful buildings, and I always think, like, where did that wealth come to build that? And I know my history, and I feel like we haven't had access to our history. I feel really privileged to actually know how much of my own history, right, and about our treaties and about the resources, and a lot of theft, not only with land but with resources. And I know myself right now. I dream of owning a home. I would love to own a home. I mean, I have a rental that I have made into a home, but I know, like, one day I want to have my own place. So I think, I'm not alone. My community deserves to have homes. So that's why I'm in this.
And Carla, you recently went to Jeremiah program. What drew you to this type of work?
it really was a way for me. I'm a first generation college student. So my siblings and I first in our family to go to and finish college. And so, but proud daughter of a military veteran in the Air Force, right? And so grew up well aware of, the importance of opportunity, access, and resources and support services that can equip families with what they need to further their education, afford a home, or just affordable housing in general, and access to childcare, right? And what an education can do toward that end. And I also worked in higher education. That's my background, working in higher education and diversity, equity, and inclusion work, right? And so when I found out what the Jeremiah program was about and how really social justice was at the core, centering moms' experiences was at the core of the work, I was like, yes, sign me up, because I do, as I said before, truly believe that those who are closest to the issue have the best solutions to the issue, right? And so the ways that Jeremiah program partners with moms and really, again, they're the experts or the drivers. They author their own solutions, right? We just provide opportunities to remove those systemic barriers that exist, right? And then you're able to thrive, right? And so providing opportunities to expand that leadership tent to get folks who traditionally have not been at the table. And as the decision makers, that's what drew me in to the work.
And Kim, your career has taken twists and turns.
Oh.
Why are you so invested in working on home ownership and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to have that?
Well, I will tell you, when I was born and raised here in Minneapolis and went to school here, and my mother raised 5 kids here, single woman. She was on public assistance. She ended up purchasing her own home with down payment assistance help. She always established good credit, so for me, she was a good role model. And I would sit back and just observe how she navigated through, but a lot of her siblings, other relatives, weren't navigating through the system that way. And so when I got into real estate, I thought, okay, I could do it. People can do it, and I can provide the right tools and resources, right? Well, then fast track, I was managing a national down payment assistance program. Now I'm with the Minnesota Homeownership Center to really provide those tools and resources to people in need, right? I've always rooted for the underdog. I love my community. I love my blackness. I love my black community. And I think that I stay connected to them by being there and helping them and providing them those tools and resources and speaking up on their behalf, right? I think that I look at Minneapolis, Minnesota before the foreclosure crisis, predominantly a high percentage were homeowners, and it changed, it shifted. After the foreclosure crisis, it shifted to renters, right? We need to get back to home ownership and taking pride, because I think that there's a lot of things that happen when you're a homeowner. I think crime is going to reduce, health care is going to be better, children in schools aren't going to be moving from school to school, right? I think that really, it helps to stabilize communities, and in this day and time, we really need our communities stabilized, and we need help. And policies, I think you're totally, Ann is totally right. It's policies. Policies has gotten us there. Policies can get us out, but we need to take ownership and responsibility for our destiny.
Absolutely. I like the word stability. So we will close with that thought. Our time is up for right now, but I want to thank our guests and thank our audience for spending your lunch hour with us. We've been talking again with Kim Smith-Moore, a Senior Director of Home Ownership Programs at the Minnesota Home Ownership Center, as well as Leanne Littleworth, the Co-Executive Director of the American Indian Community Housing Organization there in Duluth. Thank you for making the drive again. And also Carla Benson-Rutten, the Executive Director of the Jeremiah Program in St. Paul. A reminder that this conversation will be broadcast on NPR News tomorrow on my show, which airs weekdays at 9 a.m. And be sure to save the date for our next In Focus discussion. We hope to be live and in person at the Minnesota State Fair. The date is August 31st. I hope to be able to see you there. Thanks for your time. Until then, be safe and stay well.